Howdy, welcome back to the shop. Today we're working on a little S10 dune buggy project. And we're going to replace the axles and seals and bearings in this thing. Now this is a little old Chevrolet 10 bolt, 7 5/8 rear end, and it is an 11 to 41, so it's 373. That's always, well, not always, but the ones I've seen are stamped there on the ring gear. And you can tell it's a 10 bolt because it's got almost 10 bolts in it. At least that's what I know. So I've already got the axles out of here. That's pretty simple. Just pull the C-clips out. Well, you pull this retainer pin out. You got to have this lined up about right here. Pull that out. Push this pin out. And then push your axles in. And then you use your roach clips or a magnet or something. You pull the C-clips out of it. So we'll look at that when we put her back together. So I've got new axles. They're sitting over yonder. So the first thing we're going to do when we unwrap our new axles is we're going to look at them and we're going to make sure the flange didn't get bent or dinged in shipping. And then we're going to take an old brake hub, brake rotor. We're going to stick our axle in there and make sure the bolt hole pattern lines up. If it don't, they're wrong. Another thing you want to do with these mid-90s Chevys, while you got her in here, take your old axle, flip her upside down, with that fully seated in there, that fully seated in there, and make sure that your axles are actually the same length. If they're not, they're wrong. Late 90s, 96, 98, somewhere in there, they changed lengths on the axles, and it seems like they used 2 or 3 different axle lengths in 2 or 3 years, or in a year. And it got really confusing. The only way to know is to measure. So I just checked the old one again, the new one, and now I know. So here's an example of a bad axle. You can see where the bearing runs. Whoop, that might be advantageous. You can see where the bearing runs right here. There's a pit, and get out of the glare. There's a pit right there. There's a pit right there. There's a pit right there. Okay, so that axle, where it rides on the bearing, has pitted. Now, how many pits are too many? I don't know. How many gunshot wounds are too many? I don't want any gunshot wounds. I don't want no pitting in an axle. So, axles are cheap enough, just replace them. Now you can get a goofy bearing thing that switches the bearing around, and don't even fool with that. Axles are 130 bucks a side. You need to replace the replace the seals and the bearings anyway. Just get new axles and seals and bearings. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our new axle that we've confirmed the length of, and we're going to stick her in the rear end. And we're going to do that to see if it fits. There were some different spline options. They're not very common. You can usually tell by looking, but sometimes your eyes deceive you. So if it goes into the splines in the rear end, it probably fits the splines in the rear end. All right, so now it's time to knock the studs into her. Now, the axle kit that I bought was a Dorman kit. I bought it from the mail order store. It came with the bearings, the studs, the axles, the whole shooting match, the seals, all of it. The studs were not pressed in. Now you can do this on an arbor press. You can put a nut on there and pull the stud in. You can do it a lot of different ways. I like to beat them in. Now, I like to take a piece of plastic pipe and protect my bearing surface so that my hammer doesn't bounce off and whack that bearing surface, because that would make me cry. And I've just got her upside down old rear disc back here. You can use whatever you got. Don't reuse a disc after you've done this with it. So I've got me a piece of pipe or square tubing in my vise here, and I've got it held in the vise, and it goes all the way down to this old steel drum or wheel that the vise stand is made out of. Now I'm going to take and hit all 5 of them studs on top of there, just so that I know that they're perfectly and well seated, because I can seat them a lot better on this than that bouncy piece of cast iron. Now I'm eyeballing, making sure there is no gap between the head of that bolt and that flange, and they ain't. So we got her seated all the way. All right, to get the wheels or the axles, the bearings and seals out of it, I'm using EverTough. There's 1,000 people that make these or sell them. This is an EverTough 67035 puller and a 67031 slide hammer. And the way this works is you stick it up in the hole like such, and you snake it around the bearing, and then you pop it back out, and then you can yank the bearing out with the slide hammer. Pretty easy. Go. Something you should be aware of when you're doing this, especially if you've got decent looking backer plates like I've got here. We painted these a couple of weeks ago just for the sake of frustration. So if you've got anything decent, when you pull these bearings out and the seal out, you're going to get a puddle of oil run out of the axle tube right all over everything. But take a gander down up in the hole and make sure that there's no metal flakes. I'll get my flashlight out here in a minute. Look up in there, make sure there's no crazy things up in there, because this is the time to find it, not when you're stuck in the mud somewhere and you hit a bearing because you didn't look. Well, let this be a lesson to you. Even though I double checked everything that I could think to double check, I forgot to double check and make sure the bearings were the right ones. And they are not. I think these are 12 bolt bearings. And seal. The seal's the wrong size, the bearing's the wrong size. And I didn't even look before I yanked them apart. So, I think I'll cut this video here, get on the phone, see if I can find a set of bearings and seals, and we'll put her back together later. Such is life. Oh dear, oh dear. In the meanwhile, I guess ain't much else to say except for y'all drive safe and watch for deer. And make sure your parts are the right ones before you yank her apart.